We're in week 4, and last week I believe you all talked about the firmament and the heavens and the waters and the seas appearing and so on. When I taught Genesis several years ago, probably 10 or so, when I wrote this lesson, one of the things that I wanted to make sure before we got too far into the days of the week was that we understood what the rest of the world thinks about the literal days of creation, which is why I put today's lesson out earlier this week. One of the things that's interesting that's occurred to me today versus 10, 12 years ago when I taught the lesson originally, the church is running the risk of not being relevant. We've gotten ourselves anchored so far either on the right or the left of things that we've almost been marginalized ourselves. And part of the problem that, or part of the thing that does that are these kinds of things here. And this is what I'm talking about. Science. I believe in literal creation. Always have, always will. I've thought through all of these things and others that I've read. And creation is it. And a literal my wife, for those that can't see the video, is removing chairs from the. And a literal creation is where I've always come down. The problem is we get extreme folks on one side or the other who want to just throw all the science out and say, look, this is God's word, you believe this or else, and everything else doesn't matter. Or we get the other extreme where it's all science and we're not going to take the Bible literally. And this morning I want us to consider that maybe it's a little of both. Certainly we're to take the Bible literally. But there's something to some of the science that we're going to talk about this morning on the board. And I think one of the things that I see happening in archaeology right now is we're digging things out of the dirt. And it doesn't align exactly with how we've interpreted things in the Bible. And if we have the same argument going on in archaeology, well, then the dirt must be wrong. Well, no, maybe we're not interpreting things correctly. That's not to say the Bible's inerrant. We have to remember that we're to look at the original text the Bible was written in, not our English version, in order to determine if something's in error or not. And we'll talk about that more this morning. So it's important for us to understand what the world thinks, then understand what the Bible says, and then for us to be able to have a good dialogue with someone. You can't, Paul's attitude about witnessing to the lost wasn't shove it in their face, and if they don't like it, I'm out of here. Which I think Paul is a great model for how we should witness. And he took time. It says when he got to Ephesus, he was there almost 3 years. And he persuaded, at Mars Hill, he talked to people with all these different views of different gods and persuaded some that God was the God of all gods. And so we have to be the same way. We have to understand what we feel, Peter tells us, have a reason for what you believe, and then we need to understand where the world's coming from. And maybe you've heard of some of these terms before. I'm hoping you have, because I hope we have a little discussion about them. And so one of the first things I asked in the lesson today was for you to locate a definition for these things. And to give you an idea, 10 years ago when I wrote Genesis, we didn't have Wikipedia and all of that. This is what you'll get off Wikipedia as an example for the Big Bang Theory. So one of the things that we see happening around us today is this explosion of knowledge. Not that Wikipedia is an authority, by the way. There's as much bad out there as there is good. You have to be a little careful. But we can know so much more today than even 10 years ago just by getting on a website, for heaven's sakes. So what did we find out about the Big Bang Theory? We mentioned it a little. Ray and I discussed it, I think, the first week or so. What do we know about the Big Bang Theory?
Well, the theory is the universe burst into existence about 14.7 billion years ago. And the universe is a certain length old. It's not been around forever. It doesn't go off in all directions forever. And it doesn't say anything about what existed before the universe burst into existence.
Right. I got to set this down, so I'm going to be out of the camera a minute. Do you all understand what the Big Bang Theory is How did they arrive at the Big Bang Theory? How did it come about?
Well, it kind of partly came about by the observation back in the 30s that the universe is expanding.
Yeah.
And it's not a constant size, it's actually expanding. So if you extrapolate that back, well, at a certain point in time.
Exactly. Yeah, they were able to measure. As I say, science isn't always wrong. They were able to measure that the universe was expanding, and I think I haven't read all of this, but I believe it's expanding at a constant rate. I believe, isn't it? Or it's expanding at least at a rate that they can measure. I guess is a better way to put it.
It expands the speed of light.
Yeah, and then based on that, then you can basically go back to the future. You can reverse engineer this. If you know the universe is expanded this far at certain rate, then you can come back to where it started, in theory, which is what they've tried to do. They can't do it. I mean, you get to a point, but they can't go back any further than that. So then the problem is, it's like the last 2 feet. Okay, they can't get back to the beginning, so what they can't explain is how it all started. And I don't mean that either. They'll say it all started when this thing exploded and that caused it. But where did this thing come from, this compressed piece of dirt or gas or whatever it was? How did something out of nothing appear and then burst out like that? There's no scientific explanation for it, which is also why we have these other theories as well. As I said in week 1, none of us were there. God said to Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" None of us were there. We don't know. We have the Bible, and then we have theories. But the Big Bang one, the interesting thing about the Big Bang at least, is that the universe is expanding, and they're able to measure that, and we're able to learn a lot of cool things about this surrounding that God has, this space and universe that God's put inside of us, or put us inside of. But they're not able to explain the beginning. That's still an issue. So that's the difficulty with the Big Bang Theory. The second problem we have with the Big Bang Theory is from a Christian's point of view, when we read God, which we will do, I believe it's next week, set the stars in the sky, and he set the sun for day, and he set the moon for night, and so on. It doesn't sound like if it was a literal day that we had this big explosion and things just went off. So the piece that they can't measure is the part that we would read in the literal day of creation. Anyway, Big Bang Theory. So based on this, they measure the age of the Earth, 13.5 billion, 14, you get different numbers out of it. This is big math thing they do. The age of the universe, not the Earth, I'm sorry. Age of the universe. The problem you have there, and Jim and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, when God created, let's just take Adam and Eve for a minute. God created Adam. How old was Adam when God created him? We have no idea. We have no idea. We know if you're going to take a literal day view, he didn't create a cell which grew into like an amoeba, and then we have an embryo, and then and then little baby Adam laying around with nobody to care for him, flopping around in the desert for a while, and eventually he became Wolfman or something. No. He was created as man the instant he was created, at whatever age he was created. And the Bible will tell us how long he lived after that, but we don't know what age he was when he was created. How old was the earth the day it was created? I don't know. The difficulty we've got is God's creating mature creation on each day of creation. It has some age already to it. So how can you drill down and take a piece of rock and pull it apart and say, oh, the earth is X old? We don't know. Now, the Big Bang Theory, they can tell you how long perhaps the universe has existed, but the problem even with that is we don't know where in that spectrum that the Big Bang is measuring that God actually started it. The theory is you can go back to the beginning, but maybe God started it out here instead. We don't know. So there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot science does know, and the two often are in conflict. So that's the Big Bang Theory. What did we learn about intelligent design? Or is there no intelligent design?
That's kind of the idea that a lot of this it may have happened in various different ways, but wouldn't have happened without some sort of external intelligence that is directing it. In other words, it's not a random process, it's a direct process. It may be the process that science describes, but it's a directed process, not a random.
Right, that's correct. It says that whatever created these things, something created us and the universe, and it's obvious that something did by the complexity. And they have all these complexity theories and things. The complexity of each little, microorganism says there's no way that by chance that just evolved into something. Something intelligent designed all this. The climate, the atmosphere, the earth, the whole, this whole thing all integrates well. There's no way that this was just an accident. The same with the universe. Where did intelligent design come from? What drove the theory of intelligent design?
There had to be a God, maybe?
Well, there's that, and the intelligent design folks want us to get back to a God beginning, yes. But what motivated somebody to even come up with this whole concept of intelligent design? What drove them to do it?
I thought it had to do with the debate of religion in school.
Exactly.
Faith, religion.
The debate over religion in schools. Intelligent design's been around since, about 1960, I think, or something. It's a relatively new thing in terms of these various theories. What happened in schools?
There was a debate about things like prayer in schools, and then you had debates about parents wanting to teach, wanting their kids to be told that God created the world. You had other parents that wanted their kids to be taught that there's no such thing as God, it's all evolution.
Right.
I was under the impression intelligent design was sort of a compromise.
Yes.
That science is right and there is a God.
That is correct. So what happened is we had evolution being taught in schools, and we had creationism being taught in schools. And frankly, in the scientific community, it was seen as a good thing. You had two sort of opposed ideas about how creation came about, and the schools were exposing the children to both of them. And a couple of things happened at kind of the same time. The evolutionists didn't want the creationists being taught, and they argued that you're teaching religion in schools. And of course, the Christians wanted it to be taught because of the effect evolution was having on the kids' thought process. And in the end, the only way around it was to quit calling it creationism, which taught that God created everything, and they came up with intelligent design. Okay, a being created everything, and it was sort of a way to circumvent the resistance to creationism being taught in the schools. But it has no scientific basis at all. It's in fact, the scientists call it a pseudoscience. It's trying to look like a science, and it isn't. Evolution, I think we know a lot about evolution. It's certainly been around a long time. What are some of the difficulties? Aside from the fact that as a Christian it's hard to believe in evolution, at least for me it is, but what are some of the difficulties that the evolutionists are having today? First of all, it's kind of out of favor. It's nowhere near as popular a thing as it was 25, 30 years ago. But so what are some of the problems that evolution's having?
You don't have good transitions between major species. And in a microscopic sense, like drug-resistant bacteria, evolution makes a lot of sense, I think. But it dates back maybe to the evidence of the missing link. Okay, if man evolved from apes, where's the nearly man ape?
Yeah.
And I remember back in the 60s and 70s, every other month was a story in the news about we might have
found the missing link.
found the missing link. So you have major species, but you don't have like a continuous stream between the major species. My understanding is that concerned Darwin himself.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, today none of us are evolving, as far as that theory is concerned. Part of the problem with the theory is it gives the word evolve a bad name. Some things do evolve. But in any case, we don't have a half monkey, half person thing. The other problem, and we'll talk about this when we get into, is it day, I guess it's day 6, day 5, somewhere in there. When we get into the creation of animals, birds, all those sorts of things, God created distinct things. No one that I'm aware of, no female walking the face of the earth since God created Eve, has ever given birth to a giraffe. I don't think. And I don't think there's a shark in the sea that's ever given birth to a human. So
How do you explain mermaids?
I was waiting for the unicorn one. I'd forgotten about the mermaids.
Or certain politicians.
Yeah, so part of the problem of evolution is we're created distinct, and you can't find a transition from.
And it's even more complicated than a woman giving birth to a giraffe, because another woman would have to give birth to another giraffe of the opposite sex, and the two of them would have to birth to
Right.
additional
Yeah.
giraffes.
Yeah.
So it's just the fact that you have to have two to make one,
Right.
procreate,
Yeah.
makes it all more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. So evolution is having a difficult time standing on its own, but for folks who do not want to believe in the literal creation, they'll hang on to that as some plausible thing. And then we have day-age theory. What do we have in the day-age theory category?
Well, that's that the day is not a 24-hour, it's referred to in the Bible, it's not a literal 24-hour period. It comes from this Hebrew word yom,
Yom.
which means a definite time period, but not a defined.
Correct. So day-age is from the Hebrew, the yom, and that's probably pronounced different. As you can tell, I don't have very good Hebrew. But the Hebrew word for day can be interpreted as a period of time other than day, depending on the context that's written and so on. And your day-age people, what they did is they said, well, this is probably an eon, and or an age, if you will. And they interpreted it as this unknown period of time called an age. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, I can understand the logic behind it. Is
They also use the theory where it says that 1,000 years to us is like a day to God.
that's correct. That's correct. Others have taken exactly that verse of Peter says a day is like to God, a day is like 1,000 years. So then the creation was probably 6,000 years, and he rested for 1,000 after that. So you have that one as well. Yeah. The day age one though, it goes even longer than 1,000 years. And it says, so it took 10,000, 50,000 years for the ocean to form. And then it took another 20,000 years for the trees to come up out of the ground. And then it took another, and so on. And it's a way to try to get the physical that we see, the earth, the universe, and so on. And the Big Bang it's a way to get what we see to sync with the literal translation in the Bible. But it doesn't work very well. In other words, what some creationists would like is if a geologist says the Earth is 400 million years old. Oh, of course it is, because we know that there was an age to build this, and it was an age to do that, and then therefore we can say the universe was 14 billion years old because it came first, and then the. So the day-age people are trying to come up with a way to make all of this sort of be in sync. What's on its face, though? What's the aside from not taking it as a literal day? What's the challenge with the day-age theory? Suppose we assume that they were right for a minute, and then we look in the description of creation. Where do we have a sort of kind of run into a problem?
There's some sequencing problems.
Well, sequencing, that would be a good one. Hadn't thought about that. That would be a good one. I was even going to be more practical.
So applying it to the day.
Well, where I'm going is, let's assume for a minute it took thousands and thousands of years for each single day in the Bible to play out. The first issue you've got is, so what, Adam was like 100,000 years old before Eve got created, as an example. But even more practical. We're going to, next week, we're going to talk about how God had the trees and fruit-bearing trees. Poof, there's fruit-bearing trees. So if it took a couple of 100,000 years, 50,000 years, 10,000 years, pick a number, for that phase, for the trees and the fruit, now Adam shows up on the scene. What a mess. You've got, first of all, you're going to have an ocean for 30, 40,000 years and nothing going on the land. And then you're going to have whatever goes on the land for another 30, 40,000 years. And then finally you're going to have trees. And then, the sun and the moon come along after the trees do. So then we're going to have the sun and the moon in the sky for another 30, 40,000 years before the next thing. It just doesn't seem like it plays out very, I can understand where they were going, but you get fruit-bearing trees, birds flying around, you got a garden that needs to be tending, no man there to do it. It would be chaotic, I would think. It would just be, and it would be all lopsided. I mean, one of the things we see from this, the way Henry Morris is kind of walking us through creation is God, he created the elements first, then he created the hydrosphere and the atmosphere and the lithosphere, and he's going to create all these things in layers and then put man right in the middle of it. It seems like it's certainly more well played out that way. How you could do that with these thousands and thousands of years between each step just seems odd. But I could be convinced otherwise. Yeah, the kids are there now. I could be convinced otherwise. What do you all think? Hey, you don't have to take my word for things. What do you think about creation and the days?
Well, I think one of the things that helps me sort of reconcile some of this is maybe just a thought, and I'd like your opinion on this, is that maybe some of the events that we see as maybe physical things are more spiritual things.
Oh.
Like, for example, creation of Adam. I mean, maybe there were beings that were very much like humans, but they weren't man because they didn't have a soul. And the creation of Adam is actually God giving a soul to this creature. It's not a physical, assembled from dust creation. It's a spiritual creation. What do you think of that?
So, for those who are watching us on video and can't hear a word Ray just said, it was the most intelligent thing man has ever said, but we didn't get it on video. So, so if I can paraphrase what you asked, just to make sure I understand, you're saying, what if we assume that the creation was spiritual to begin with, and then kind of flesh was added? Am I?
Well, more the other way around.
That you had physical creation first. Okay.
Animals or whatever things.
Mhm.
And then the creation of man specifically, maybe.
Right.
Maybe you could apply this to other things as well, but let's just talk about Adam.
Right.
It wasn't so much that he was physically assembled from dust at that instant. It was that God granted him a soul. He became a man in a spiritual sense.
Right. Well, and it's certainly true. I mean, the Bible even tells us that Adam became a living soul when God breathed life into him. And we'll have a lot to say about the creation of man from dust. One of the things I'll point out in that lesson is, I think we've mentioned this before, the other things were spoken to existence, animals, fish, birds, but man was created out of dust, and then we get to Eve, and she was created out of man, rather than being spoken into existence. So yeah, there is a lot we don't understand, too. I mean, one of the things I've mentioned before, the whole spiritual world thing was already created by the time Adam arrived on the scene. I mean, Satan walks into the garden and talks to Eve. Well, it does get a little loud out there, doesn't it? Everything going on in the spirit world before the earth was even created, perhaps, we know nothing about, and God doesn't want us to know anything about, other than the fall of Satan from God's grace and the fall of the other angels with him. So it is fascinating. I do kind of wish we were back. Can you imagine what it would have been like to see all of this? It would have been like an episode of Lost, wouldn't it? See all this created, and if you're like I am, how many times have we thought about what was that garden like? What was it like to live there? And I know this is TMI, Sherry will tell you, but so they're naked, which it seems odd to us today because thankfully we all wear clothes, particularly me. But what was that? What kind of a garden did you have where you could walk around naked and you were okay? I wouldn't, even if I was allowed. You don't want to go out through the rose bushes naked trimming the roses, temperature controlled, yeah. One of the things we'll talk about when we look at the flood. They didn't have blue sky. The theory is that the sky was green. It was a nice pastel sort of shade of green because of the water above the firmament that you all looked at last week. So the whole biodome thing was definitely in play. What was that like, and what creatures were there that we don't have today? And so it's just fascinating to think about. And we'll talk about some of that when we get to each of those. But what I wanted to emphasize today, we're going to get pushed out of the room for noise, but what I wanted to emphasize today is this is what the world thinks. And there's other odd things out there. I mean, these are just four of more of the key things that you need to be aware of. And I guess my message, when I started this morning, the lesson, and I was talking about the difference in 10 years, my message is we need to be more tolerant, which I'm talking right to myself now. I believe in 6 literal days, and I've studied all this stuff, and I've just come to the conclusion it's 6 literal days. But I at least have enough patience to listen to other folks' arguments or positions and present mine, rather than, well, if that's the way you think. You know, we can't be so extreme one side or the other, or we're not going to reach anybody. Christ wasn't like that. I don't know if you ever thought about it or not. When he met the Samaritan woman at the well, what was her name, by the way? Good trivia question for the next Bible cocktail party you're at. Yeah, she didn't have a name. She was he didn't say to her, now look, you heathen, you guys worship on the wrong mountain. He didn't say that to her at all. He was quite concerned about her, and he knew her background and all these things. We need to be like that. The only time Christ was ever, rigid's probably a bad word, ever really strict in that way, was with the very people who were in charge of teaching his people. That's who he was on fire about. All the rest of us are sinners. We sin one way, the lost sin another way, we all sin. And at one time or another, we were all lost, by the way. And so that is part of my message today. We need to have a little compassion when we're talking to folks about these things. And somebody comes up and says, you creation people, we all know science tells us the Earth's 13 billion years old. You people are delusional. Well, we might be, but we need to be tolerant of their position as well. And the other thing we need to realize is nobody knows. I mean, I know there's this whole creation movement around, there's websites, there's different ministries. The Earth's 10,000 years old and no more or something. Well, the problem I have with that now is archaeology is finding things we know is 10, 12, 13,000 years old. And it's all post-flood, post-diluvial, you'll call it. So we just need to be a little tolerant. When we get into the flood, I have a lot of information for you on the flood. But I'm sorry? A flood of information. But yeah, I think the message I wanted to get across with this lesson is understand these are out there. And I think, did we have, I stopped on the first question. Let me do real quick here. What else did we have? Describe, or the watchmaker analogy. Well, the watchmaker analogy is another form of intelligent design. And it simply says if you look at the way everything is in sync, some supreme being, God, had to have built this. There's no way this is an accident. The modern evolutionary synthesis is trying to bring together evolution and creation, and basically it says God used evolution to create. What is the basic position of, his fallacy, the junkyard tornado, we've talked about before, and that's, if you think all this came as an accident, it'd be the same as a tornado going through a junkyard, and after it's gone, a 747 is completely built.
That's just a different way of looking at the
intelligent design thing again, that's correct. Yeah, that one and the watchmaker thing, it's all along the same lines. Creation of the first, okay, so I said what explanation is given by the Big Bang Theory and evolution for the creation of the first molecule or first cell? They don't have an explanation. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody knows how it all started. We just don't. Everybody has theories, but nobody knows. Why do many creationists reject the Big Bang Theory as an explanation regarding the beginning of creation? Could not God have created the Big Bang? And the answer I wrote down is the difficulty with accepting the Big Bang Theory as the method that God used for starting the creation process is that it supposes the 6 days of creation in the Bible were ages and not literal days. And then the day-age theory, we've already sort of talked about that. Okay, we did cover them all. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, boy, we do have kind of a rowdy group outside, don't we? Church full of little ones. Okay, sorry, I know I bored you half to death with all this theory business. We'll get back to the exciting part of the Bible next Sunday. But it's just important for us to be aware of our surroundings and what all's out there. One of the things we're going to see, we have religions, we've studied some of them before we started this course, that worship the creation, not the creator. I'll give you a good example of that quickly is Buddha. Is it Buddha? I believe it's Buddha, where they believe that life is in everything. So they don't, you don't see a cow wandering around, they won't kill it because they believe somebody's reincarnated there. And who were we talking to? Or was it Julie? Somebody mentioned to me they had a friend who was Buddhist, and she said, yes, she said, we would rather kill a cow than have 12 shrimp for dinner because it's 12 individual people. Yeah, so they've got it all. They're worshiping the creation, and they're all like, how it all came about. Who has dominion over it never enters into their faith. Where our job is to keep our eye on God and be in the world and not of it. That's the trick.